All right. Okay, we are back. Still Lunch and Lubes, but will be posted at a different time, and that's okay. I am here with Drew from Blu Petroleum, a good friend of mine in the industry for quite some time. And since I have never worked with fuels and know nothing about them, Drew is a great resource for all of that information. So go ahead and tell us about yourself, what you do, who you are, etc.
Yeah, like you said, my name is Drew. I work for a company called Blu Petroleum. We are a fuel delivery company. We set up tanks for our customers, or if you don't need a tank, we deliver fuel to you. We deliver fuel to all our customers, really. Yeah, and I've been in the industry for a couple of years now, and just wanted to, I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah. So let's start with you obviously you are working with various types of fleets, right? So
Yes.
construction, trucking, landscaping, municipalities, anybody who needs fuel and on-site fuel. How would you start the conversation with someone when they're trying to consider on-site fueling? What are some of the things that these companies need to consider?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it does come up a lot where you have a company that doesn't normally or that uses gas stations to for their fleet to fuel up and all that. And it's one of those things where you kind of just have to start off by saying, what are some of the things that you're experiencing with your fleet being at the gas station? Maybe they're being there too long. Maybe the way that they're purchasing fuel is kind of comes into question in terms of like if they're using a credit card, and there's some concerns possibly of using it for anything other than fuel and that sort of thing. So you kind of just have to figure out where they're experiencing some issues. From that point on, most of the time you can also save them money. Having bulk storage on site versus paying at the gas station. And then also there's just the convenience of having it in your yard, because one of the biggest things that comes into play when you have a fleet is that you want to make sure that you fuel up at the end of the day versus at the beginning of the day. And sometimes it's harder to just stop at a gas station at the end of the day, and sometimes it's just easy just to go right to your shop, and then you can fuel up right at your shop and then put your vehicle away and then jump in the vehicle the next morning and not have to worry about fuel. So you get right out to your job site as soon as possible. So those are some of the basic things that we look for when we're talking to customers that don't already have fuel.
Okay. All right. So now you've got someone they're ready to commit. They're going to pull the trigger. How do you decide what style of tank or tank capacity, and then where that's going to be located in the yard?
Yeah, and that's another good question. And that's kind of that's kind of where it hits home, is the yard space versus logistically speaking, where's the best place to put it in their yard. What makes sense for them. Sometimes it's on the way out. If there's an entrance and an exit, so sometimes you just put it on, right next to one of those. Tank size is kind of all based on their usage and how far away they are from where we pull from the terminals in our shop. If we have other customers in that area too. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. Most of the time it's based on usage though. So if you're going through, 2,500 gallons in 1 week, we might suggest, a 2,500 gallon tank, or maybe even a 3,000 gallon tank, just so that we have, we don't need to be in your yard that much, which is also another pain point sometimes, is if a fuel company is in the yard too much, then it becomes a nuisance, and
Sure.
there's some issues there. But we don't want to, so like I said, we don't want to be in your yard too much, so that kind of actually lends to maybe just having a once a week fill and that sort of thing. Typically speaking, if you're a mid-sized company, we would just probably make it a once a week fill, and then based off your usage, kind of just make it, figure out the tank size based on that.
Okay. Yep. We had on our live call, we had started to talk about the different factors that go into where you're located and making considerations within the US. So what are some things that someone might have to consider, in humid Florida versus cold northern Minnesota when they're considering on-site fueling?
Yeah, that's a popular question. There's, like I mentioned on the live call that we actually have, the benefit of both worlds being in Chicagoland area because we get the super cold temperatures along with the super hot temperatures. So,
Yep.
but I guess that's just Illinois. No, we have up in Minnesota. Let's just start there. Basically, you have your cold winter additives. And then some companies even get into mixing number one diesel with number two diesel. And you see different combinations of 70-30% mix, 70% number two diesel, 30% number one diesel. But most of the time companies are just satisfied with the, and it works. It really does work with the additives that companies will use to, to put in the fuel that will actually, most additives, and just kind of speaking from my perspective from our company, our additive, just a single dose gets it down to -30-ish, and then a double dose gets it down to -40, 45-ish. So with just the additives, you're covered, as far as, as far down as I've ever experienced it cold
Right.
wise, in Illinois. And then when you have, temperatures that are warmer down in Florida, Texas, all those different temperatures, you have the benefit of having a regular climate kind of when you're down in those areas, because you can kind of then base your maintenance schedule off of, just kind of having a consistent operating temperatures and that sort of thing. Obviously, you get a little bit, it gets higher, as you go into the summer and that sort of thing.
Right.
But you have a baseline of 60, 70 degrees that you can operate off of. But when you're down there, you want to make sure that you don't have that you keep. Sorry, when you're down in those temperatures, you want to make sure that you monitor your water level or your water in the fuel tank. You can do that by different tests that are out there, but the biggest concern is algae growth in your tank, and that starts really when you have water in your tank. So
Okay.
basically, there's different chemicals that you can use to get rid of the water. There's a tank dry. It's a company that creates a tank dry treatment. And then, from that point on, if you do have, it might be a different question, but if you do have, bio algae or anything like that growing in your tank, there's a biocide that you can use to get rid of that.
Okay, I do know that was one of the questions that was asked, so that's good to know. For someone, if we back up a little bit, for someone who knows absolutely nothing about fuel like myself, when you say a diesel number one versus diesel number two, what is the difference between those two products?
So diesel number two, it has that's the most predominantly used. Diesel number one, I always tell people, you remember the show Ice Road Truckers? People like that would use the diesel number one because it's better in lower temperatures. Diesel number two has more lubricity to it, which is better for the milder climates. And it keeps those diesel engines running a lot better than diesel number one would, because even in the fuel side of things, you still do need a little bit of lubricity to keep everything going. So yeah, that's kind of the simple difference there.
Okay. No, that's great. That's really good to know. Now, what about considerations for someone who has gas engines in their fleet? And maybe needs both storage tanks on site. Are there any different considerations for gasoline over diesel?
Gasoline is a lot easier than diesel. You definitely can use storage tanks, gasoline storage tanks for gasoline. We have a lot of customers that only have gasoline in their storage tanks. But you don't really need to watch it as carefully as diesel.
Okay.
If you're not using it, that's definitely a situation. But that's even like if you don't use it for up to a year, which if you're a fleet, that's not going to be a problem.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's fairly easy to store gasoline at, fluctuating temperatures. You're still possibly going to get water in your tank if you leave your tank half full or below for more than a little bit. You always want to make sure that you keep your tanks between 50 and 100% full, just because of the condensation that sometimes happens when you have bare walls inside the tanks, that isn't touched by the fuel. Just the temperature changes even from day to night, night to day, can create, condensation and that sort of thing. So for both gas and diesel, to keep water, to eliminate as much as possible water out of your tank, the best practice is to keep them between 50 and 100% full.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
How does is there a differentiator? So if you guys are obviously pulling up to the same racks to get your fuel that you're delivering to your customers, that these major gas stations that their haulers are pulling up to get the fuel. So is there a difference? How do I ask this? Shell gas stations are getting Shell blended fuels. When you're pulling up to the racks, you're not getting Shell gas. What is that all? Can you explain the racks? I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it comes up a lot, or it comes up a little every once in a while. We are just pulling from, most of the time we're pulling from whatever rack we don't. So Blu Petroleum doesn't specifically have a branded fuel that we pull from, but we do have racks that we go to on a regular basis that either make sense logistically for us, or basically that's really what it comes down to, is logistically speaking. There are companies though that I have heard that there are companies that are strictly mobile users, that sort of thing, where they have to pull from mobile racks. But for Blu Petroleum, we only go out to where we go to really any rack that we are. There's a qualification process. There's a process that you have to go through, that each driver really has to go through with each rack. But that's kind of more on an internal basis, and that's what we do have a few racks that we go to, but like I said, it's more just like a logistically speaking situation.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Now I know when we are dealing with fuels, we have a lot of EPA environmental considerations. So when you are putting tanks on site for someone, what kind of hoops are you having to jump through, and do those vary by state, county, municipality, or is there kind of a general set across the board?
That is, that's a great question. And it's one of the major issues, not issues, because it's definitely needs to be done, but it's one of those situations where we deal with the state, we deal with the local governments, the local municipalities, and then also sometimes we have to deal with the local county municipality if it's an unincorporated area or that sort of thing. Usually the state it's a fairly straightforward process. And I mean, it is not usually, it's a straightforward process. We get permits back within hours of submitting them sometimes. But the municipalities, the local municipalities, that's another deal. I mean, it just kind of really depends on where you are. Like there's certain municipalities like up north and northwestern and in Illinois, say, just dealing with a company that was out there, super easy. Actually, they basically just told us that they go with whatever the state of Illinois says. So okay. Sometimes they don't even require an inspection. They just have to require the inspection report from the state of Illinois. And then there's other municipalities where we have to get a special variance for that specific company, because they're generally just no tanks allowed, period. And so we have to go and get a special variance for that company and say this company needs to do this to continue to work here. And most of the time it's okay, go ahead and under these regulations. But it varies differently, depending on where you are. It's kind of crazy sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I could see that being a bit of a headache from time to time. Yeah. So now, how often should people expect to be inspected, or what kind of things are they going to have to deal with once tanks are installed and operational, from that standpoint?
Yeah, that's a good question. We basically, when you have an above ground storage tank, I would say, I mean, it may differ between the different local municipalities. And then you also may have some issue or some fire inspectors coming inspecting the building, and they may just check out the fuel tank and that sort of thing. But as far as your normal, say 2,500 gallon fuel tank that's out at a customer site, as long as it's permitted and everything, there's not usually any follow-up inspection. So there's just the initial inspection. I know for the state of Illinois, there is just the initial inspection. And then nothing really after that. There's no follow-up or anything like that. So after you pass that initial state inspection, which it's hard to change it after, after the inspection, because
Yeah.
everything that's installed there is needed and necessary. So it's just one of those things where you kind of just have to deal with it once.
Sure. Okay. Okay, we're already coming up on getting close to 20 minutes. I'll ask you a few more quick questions.
Definitely.
Why do you guys deal with in-ground tanks as well as above ground tanks?
In-ground tanks, not so, we don't do a ton of those. We can do them, but honestly, it's mostly just above ground tanks.
Okay.
That's an entirely different process, permitting wise and all that.
Sure. What should someone be looking for when they are getting ready to deal with a fuel distributor? Are there some key things that they should be looking at when they're making their decision?
Yeah, I would definitely make sure that it's well within their territory, I guess you could say. A lot of times it could become an issue and most of the time when we're scheduling out and all that, we want to make sure that we get to you and all that. So we'll put monitors on your tanks if you're a heavy user. So that's not really a problem. And we could definitely make sure we get out there, and our monitors are set to send an alert between 30 and 40% capacity. So when that happens, then we get you on the schedule and all that. But I definitely want to make sure that I would make sure that you're within a good amount of their territory. That way they can get to you without any issues. And our territory is basically northern Illinois. That's just one of those things where we've kind of made that solidified. But I think that's the key thing. Honestly, we do hiring a fuel distributor or fuel delivery company. You're hiring us to deliver fuel for you, and if that can't happen, that's kind of just going to be a stain on our record, really. So we'll make sure that happens no matter what. So
sure.
Yeah.
Are there any special accreditations or certifications that you guys have to carry?
So our trucks have to be inspected regularly. Trucks are inspected regularly. The pumps on the trucks are inspected regularly. Myself as an account manager, no, there's nothing on that level of anything. But everything is, fuel delivery and fuel distribution is all very, very regulated. So everything is checked and tested all the time. So.
Okay. Let me just reflect back to those couple of questions that got sent in to make sure we hit them.
Yeah, definitely.
Somebody asked B20 bio and older mechanical fuel systems. Is that good or bad?
So that's kind of a two-parter, and I'll be quick about it. But the first part is biodiesel acts sort of like a solvent, I guess you could say. And so with the older equipment, you're going to have some deposits that are mixed in without mixed in throughout your fuel system. And when you switch when you switch to biodiesel, because it is a solvent, it sort of cleans your system.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen is that's a good thing in the end, but what's going to happen is you might blow through some fuel filters in the beginning as things get out of your system, get flushed out.
That's interesting. It's the same thing with switching to fully synthetic lubricants.
Oh yeah.
People freak out about leaking, but that's because it's cleaning out a lot of the crap that was in like the different cracks in the system, which is ultimately a good thing in the long run. Okay, do they still make winter blend fuel? We kind of answered that already. It sounds like yes, with the mixing of the ratios. We talked about best practices for fuel storage and potential additives that can be used if there's problems or for season changes. And then the last one was what what if a tank gets biodiesel bugs, and you said that there is a fungicide, or was that the right
Yeah, there's a biocide that you can use.
biocide? There we
Yeah,
go.
there is also a service that's called tank polishing. Blu Petroleum does do tank polishing. There are also companies out there that only specialize in tank polishing, and basically it's like a dialysis system where you run your fuel through a series of filters, and then it pumps it back into the tank. So you're getting rid of all the bad stuff. You treat it with a biocide first to kill everything, and then you get rid of all the bad stuff and pump the fuel back in. Some companies will just pump out the bottom fuel, the fuel at the bottom where all the sludge is and everything. But then you're losing that fuel. So basically the tank polishing pumps it back into the tank, and then you get to keep the fuel basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's a question from me, just personally, more on behalf of the regular consumer and not, say, a company. And this may be in your wheelhouse, it may not, because you're with a distributor, you're dealing with companies more often. But for someone who is pulling up to a gas station, obviously there's a handful of different choices they have: unleaded, regular, premium. And what are the differences between those three? And then what about the ethanol fuels?
Ethanol fuels, that's you're talking about the E10 and all that.
Yeah.
E85. Yeah, we technically we could sell those more often than not. We don't sell ethanol or anything like that. But yeah, as you're going up to I guess we can start with the 87 versus the 89 and then the 93, the premium. Basically, they're better quality gas. They're higher octane and better quality gas fuel. I guess normally we sell the mid grade to marinas and that sort of thing. They have their own additive, but yeah, most marinas like the mid grade, and then we also use mid grade for mixed gas tanks. So your landscapers will use it for mixed gas and mixed mixed gas equipment. So your blowers, weed trimmers and that sort of thing, all your 2-cycle engines. And then the 93, I mean, there's really a lot of, for me, I don't sell a lot of 93 or 89 because of the cost difference. Cost difference is significant, and it's not, a lot of times it's not cost beneficial, as opposed to just using the 87. So most of my customers just use the 87. That's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but
that's for a company's standpoint, considerations. But for the basic average mom, kid, whoever driving their car to a gas station, obviously if you have a vehicle that calls for premium, you need to be using premium. But if you have a regular car that is okay with unleaded, from what I understand, you could use any of those products in there.
Yeah, you definitely could. From what I know about the ethanol based, it is more of, I guess you get less of you get a worse gas mileage based off of that, or with the ethanol based fuels. It is cheaper, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to balance the cost versus the gas mileage and that sort of thing.
That's interesting.
You can definitely use all of those, ethanol and any of the different grades of octane in any vehicle really. Most of the time you're going to have, it's going to be recommended that you use 87, just because of the cost and all that. So
but that's interesting to know. Like, I did not know that ethanol based fuels came with a lower fuel economy. So that's really interesting and good for people to consider, especially when gas prices are so high right now.
It is. I have had a couple companies ask about it, and they elected not to do it just because, I mean, it was cheaper, but it also, it's one of those.
In the long run, it wasn't cheaper, right?
Exactly.
Interesting. All right. Well, cool. We are definitely at our time limit here for this. I could think of more questions, so we might have to do another one of these. And when I post this up, I'll have people enter any questions for you in the comments. So keep an eye on that and feel free to answer any, but we can always come back and do another one. So
Yeah,
This was
definitely.
great. Thank
Yeah,
you
this is
so
fun.
much.
I'd like to do it again. Thank you for
And
having me.
where can people find you if they have more questions?
So I have a LinkedIn account. I also have an Instagram account. You've tagged it a couple times,
Yep.
on Facebook as well. And my phone number and contact information is on all those. So yeah, hit me up if you need any fuel in the Chicagoland area.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
Yep.